The next session is with Professor Jamie Dobson, University of Creative Arts, UK. Jamie is an academic and a designer. He graduated with a degree in architecture from Kingston University in 1997 and went on to work as an architectural assistant and lighting designer for Spears and Major Associates, working on projects like Burj Al Arab, Gateshead Millennium Bridge, and the Royal Festival Hall refurbishment, among others. He then completed an MA in Communication Design from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, London, graduating with a distinction. His clientele includes Adobe, Apple, Sony, UAL, Lawrence King Publishers, Bibliothèque, etc. He has received much critical acclaim for these projects, and his work has been published across the design and photography press. He regularly lectures about his work in the USA and across Europe. His talk today will be Learning How to Learn. Over to you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I need to warn you, there's lots of slides, but I'm going to race through them. I want to show you lots and lots of images, and hopefully kind of inspiring images. The presentation split into 3 parts, really. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. So yeah, I'm from University for the Creative Arts, and this is me, Jamie Dobson. I'm a professor, but I'm also a graphic design lecturer and a graphic designer. And I've done lots of other things. So I think it's really kind of important to acknowledge this, that you know, I didn't just kind of pop out as a graphic designer or a professor. I've done lots and lots of other things through my career. So you can see here, I've obscured most of them. But at one point, I cleaned boats. I've been a DJ. I used to drive a van. I've been an architect and a lighting designer. We talked about those. They're quite grand. But yeah, now I'm a professor of design education, graphic design lecturer, and a designer. And I think what I do now for the university revolves around my own personal design practice. So I'm a designer. I'm a designer. I was a graphic design lecturer as well. And then I became a course leader. And then I became one of the heads of school at the university. And I did that for 6 years or so until my own personal design practice kind of took over again. So I had to step back from that role. So I now work for the university 2 days a week. And I'm back to being a graphic design lecturer again, which is a huge amount of fun. So these are the 3 things that I'm going to talk about today. A bit about my kind of origin story, a bit about the past, present and future, and then some specific things. And hopefully all of these things add up a little to how to learn how to learn. Yeah, so origin story. So I'm from a seaside town in the UK called Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth isn't great at all. It's horrible. And it's one of those places that, you know, I just longed to leave when I was a child. But I guess I didn't have, this sounds like a kind of odd thing to say, I think, but I just didn't have any kind of privilege, any kind of advantage, any, you know, my family, none of my family had any qualifications. And so when I finished school, there was no expectation on me whatsoever to do anything other than go out and work. And so that's what I did. I ended up working in a fish and chip shop, this fish and chip shop. And it was horrible. It was a really, you know, I didn't want to do this. You know, I was really interested in fashion. I was interested in music. Actually, I was interested in design, but I didn't quite know it at this point. But I was really lucky because I met a man who was actually an illegal immigrant. He was from Pakistan and he was working in this fish and chip shop with me. And he was a qualified doctor, you know, working in this shop. And he told me, I mean, we became great friends. And he told me I was wasting my life and I had all of this opportunity and I needed to use it. And he was more influential than my parents and my family. He was amazing. So I've got him to thank. So I mentioned I was really interested in music. I was interested in fashion. At the end of the road with the fish and chip shop on, there was this place, the School of Art. So, you know, I could see really interesting people going in and out of here. And, you know, I kind of wanted to be like one of these people, one of these interesting people. And so I found my way in. At this point in time, I was reading magazines like the cover on the left, a publication called Ray Gun, designed, publication called Ray Gun. And, you know, this was in 1989, I think, designed by a guy called David Carson. And I thought this was the pinnacle of design. I thought this was, you know, the most amazing, radical thing I'd ever seen. But my tutors were quite clever. You know, they knew lots. and they knew lots about the kind of context of graphic design. And so they showed me images like the one on the right, which is by a guy called Marinetti, an Italian futurist poet from 1910. So this piece of work on the right is 80 years before the piece of work on the left. And this blew my mind. You know, this made me feel really humble, actually. I didn't know it all, and there were really interesting, exciting things to learn. These are some images of work I made when I was 17. I quite like showing these. So these are illustrations for a poem. And so even at this point, I think I was doing things in quite an unconventional way. So this was an illustration project when I was at art school. But I was making illustrations using kind of found objects and then photographing them. This was also deeply influenced by a guy called Vaughan Oliver, who's a graphic designer, who I might come back to Vaughan a bit later. Something I just want to point out is, you know, when you do something like I think you're doing, when you go to art school, when you go on to study design, you meet so many interesting people. You know, you're surrounded by them. And so this guy here, Marcus, I met on my first day at art school. Marcus is an illustrator. This is a copy of a magazine called GQ. So it's a kind of international magazine. And yeah, I met Marcus on my first day. He's incredibly successful in his own way. He's also a skateboarder, and he also works with disabled children. So he has this really, you know, these really kind of interesting drivers, I think, for his practice. This image is taken by a guy called Jason Evans, and this is another photograph by Jason Evans. And the funny thing is, we all met on the first day at art school. And I think my point here is that I've worked with these two guys over the last, wow, 30 years now. You know, you meet these people and they end up being great friends and collaborators. And we also talk about this in terms of kind of networking and those kind of business terms. But for me, you know, it's about kind of friendships and how those friendships develop and how you support each other through your career. Jason, he's really famous. Yeah, he's a fashion photographer, but he also photographs bands like lots of music, lots of work for music. There's some really famous photographs of Radiohead that were taken by Jason. The interesting thing about Jason is that he studied sculpture as well. So he studied sculpture, fine art. He treats the kind of subjects in fashion photography like elements in a still life. And so you can see that here. Okay, so in my big introduction, it was kind of explained how I worked as an architectural lighting designer. And so, yeah, so what happened was, you know, I ended up studying graphic design at art school, and then it was almost like the top of my head was blown off, and, you know, I felt so inspired. And I ended up studying architecture, and partly actually back to my parents, because my parents, you know, I mentioned didn't, you know, they didn't have any formal qualifications. They didn't understand what graphic design was, and they really kind of questioned this. Why would you want to study graphic design? Graphic designers, don't they just design toothpaste tubes? And because I didn't know really very much about graphic design myself at this point, I found it quite difficult to kind of argue. And so I ended up saying, well, okay, I'm going to study architecture, because that was something that, you know, you can understand. Architects design buildings. In their mind, architects don't design buildings like this. So anyway, I was very lucky. I ended up working for this architectural lighting design company. I mean, I worked really hard. I guess, you know, luck is an element, isn't it? But I worked really hard to get here. So I'm just going to show you a few images from my kind of lighting design days, because there's so many things that I want to show you. This is Gateshead Millennium Bridge. This is something called Magna, which is a huge kind of visitor attraction in Rotherham in the UK. It's absolutely huge in an old steelmaking shed. This is something that if you've been to London, you might recognise. This is called Golden Jubilee Bridges. And so this is a kind of twinned footbridges that cross the Thames between the Royal Festival Hall and Charing Cross Station. There we go. Again, if you've been to London and if you've been to the City of London, the kind of financial centre, you've probably seen this. This is a building designed by Foster and Partners called Swiss Re or 30 St Mary Axe, or the Gherkin, it's known as. Yeah, another really interesting project here. And for me, this was towards the end of my career as a lighting designer, and I became really much more, and the practice became much more, the studio became much more interested in kind of environmental responsibility. I mean, it doesn't really look like it in this building, but what we did was we ended up lighting this building from the inside. We used spill light, the kind of office light, to reveal the form. I think my favorite project ever, this is called Bridge of Aspiration, which is part of the Royal Ballet School in London, in Covent Garden. And this is designed by Wilkinson Eyre, and you know, it's beautiful. I think it's a really beautiful, simple form, and it dances across the road, which is absolutely perfect, of course, for a ballet school. And so again, here, what I'm doing is designing the lighting. In the introduction, you mentioned Burj Al Arab in Dubai. So this is a huge, you know, hotel and restaurant complex. Yeah, and a real kind of landmark building. Royal Festival Hall was mentioned at the beginning. I don't think I've got any images of that, but this is St Paul's Cathedral. And so I ended up in terms of my kind of lighting design career, doing refurbishment work. St Paul's Cathedral, you know, is fascinating. You know, it's a kind of world kind of heritage site. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And so you know, the lighting design here, you know, it has to be sympathetic. You know, it can't damage anything. In the future, it will be removed and someone else will do something better. I really love this idea. You know, this is the best we can do at the moment with the current technology. But back to graphic design. So I guess back to kind of learning how to learn, maybe. I'm really curious. You know, I can't help but do stuff. I can't help but play and experiment. I feel like I'm like a child. And while I was working for the lighting design company as a lighting designer, I was also doing an awful lot of graphic design for them. And it resulted in this book, actually an exhibition as well. The exhibition toured the world. But this book is called Made of Light, the Art of Light and Architecture. And so this is a proposal, my proposal to the two directors. You know, maybe we can make a book, but rather than it being a kind of coffee table book like all architects do, maybe this can be a reference book for students that's also beautiful. And so that's what it became. So I designed this, and I wrote quite a lot of it, and I photographed an awful lot of the, you know, I made an awful lot of images for the book. And for me, this was a kind of hopping off point. So it got me really interested in graphic design again, and what graphic design might be able to kind of do. And at this point, it was still quite kind of naive. So yeah, so it kind of served this other purpose. You know, it was an important thing for the studio, but it also served a kind of personal purpose. It made me think about what I was doing and could I do things differently. So I ended up doing an MA. The MA kind of overlapped the book in the end. And I had this idea in my head that I was going to be an amazing typographer, because that's what graphic does. You know, my kind of hero graphic designers are fantastic typographers. But I actually found a couple of things. One was that maybe I'm not a terribly good typographer. I'm not sure I'm that disciplined. And the other was that when I pulled together my own personal interests in a kind of graphic design context, I produced work that was different to anyone else's. And, you know, this was an important lesson to me, and maybe, you know, this is an important lesson to you. So I'm going to demonstrate what I mean by this. So normally there's a little video here, but our videos aren't working. So this is a device that visually represents sound. And it draws the sound in light, and you photograph the device. You end up capturing the kind of sound. So the sound is, or the light of this, or the representation of the sound is written in light, and it's captured on film. I only use analog cameras. So this is a photograph of the machine, this machine. a single exposure. And that's a bit boring, actually. It's just like a halo of light. You can't see anything. And so what I discovered was if I moved the camera like this, just through one axis, through the exposure, I end up recording a kind of cylinder of light. And so this is, just to explain again, this is one single photograph, an analog photograph. And the length of time it takes to take the photograph is the length of time it takes to play the record. And so this is an entire record written in light. So this was an experiment. This is an experiment while studying graphic design. At this point, I wasn't sure whether it was graphic design or not, even, but what I'm doing is I'm doing this, within the context of graphic design. I think I'll come back to some of these things in a second, but what I found was when I graduated, people loved these, and lots of people wanted to kind of work with me to produce more of these images. And so one example is here. There's a band called the White Stripes that you may have come across. They were a kind of two-piece. And I was commissioned by their record company to make images that were then projected while they were performing. Anyway, so I kind of liked this experimental process. I liked the idea that I might make something and photograph it and then do something with it. And so I also have already mentioned about feeling a bit insecure about typography. So here I thought I'd make a device that could visually write text in the air. And so this was something that was quite common at this point. But what I did was I made this device that could spin this little kind of LED array at different speeds and different ways. And again, I photographed it, and I photographed it just through one static point, and then I photographed it moving the camera through this kind of axis as well. And so these are the very, very first test shots. This even says test 1, I think. I'll come back to what I did with some of these things in a minute. I did the same thing again. So here I've got a line following robot, and the line following robot, it scampers around because it's trying to read this image behind it that's not a solid line. It gets confused. And so it does this. It kind of goes around in circles until it can find a line again. And again, I think I'm coming back to these things now. So these are some of the things that kind of happened afterwards, after graduating. And so here, I was asked to work with an advertising agency called Fallon. And this is the beginning of a kind of relationship with Fallon. And what they wanted me to do was to recreate this image, recreate this, the kind of trace of this sound to sell Sony tellies. I was never really sure that these things went very well together, but they were very happy with the result. And then this project led to something else, which I'll come back to. I was much happier with this. And so this is a tiny commission. This is a book about experimental music. And so I was asked to make these kind of experimental illustrations for a book about experimental music. And then this is the LED type thing that I showed you. And so here, this is another book, but this time the book's called Reinvented, and I was just asked to write the word reinvented. And so again, this is a single exposure. So as designers, though, I think as designers, what we do sometimes, or what I do, is you work on something like this, which is tiny. And then I ended up working in a studio with some really clever people, one guy, a really clever engineer. And we decided we'd scale this up. So, this is tiny. This is the size of, this big. But we scaled this device up to make it the size of a building. So we developed this really the technology was about how you could deploy this and how you could take these devices to music festivals or festivals in the city. You can unfurl them from the side of a building, these kinds of things. And so we started this company called Lightfoot with the idea that these might be used for advertising. I think as designers, we can do this. We're kind of entrepreneurial. We can take something, we can, hopefully, if we know the right people, we can work quite quickly and we can scale things up and we can, be kind of innovative. Another example of the Sony campaign, this time using the kind of robot device. And then a little story, and I guess how one thing kind of leads to another. I was commissioned by a company called MetaDesign, and MetaDesign had two offices at this point, one in Berlin and one in San Francisco. And the office in San Francisco wanted me to basically use the robot to make these numerals. Then they invited me to go to San Francisco. And so I went to San Francisco and met them and did a lecture and some other things for them. And then they asked me to work for them. And so I worked for them for a while. One of the projects I worked on with them was the branding for Adobe Acrobat 8. And so what you might be able to see, this is the Adobe trefoil, but if you were to invert this image so the black becomes white, you can kind of imagine that the images on the front of this packaging are that kind of inverted image. And actually this was the kind of reference material, which we then created digitally for these. So yeah, that was fun. And then this works much better as a video, but you might have to look this up. So then I had been working for Fallon, and working with a guy called Juan Cabral, an Argentinian guy who was at that point one of the creative directors at Fallon. And so I'd worked with him on the Sony campaign. We ended up working on this, which is a Sony TV advert called Bouncing Balls. And so, yeah, look this up because it's really interesting. What it is 250,000 rubber balls that we bounced down a street in San Francisco and filmed in one take. So just like my, photography work where everything's done in one take, it's all caught in camera. It was the same for this advert. This won a Golden Lion at Cannes as well. So we did incredibly well off the back of this. Yeah, just tidying up maybe. So Apple ended up using my record trace image as well. So for one of the Apple playlists, trance and progressive, if you've got Apple Music, and you go to the trance and progressive playlist, you'll see this image. Other things that I've been doing lots and lots and lots over the last few years. One of the things that I do is I work for Google. Actually, I work for Nest, and I'm one of the European kind of creative consultants for Nest. And so what I have been doing is proposing other things that they might do using the kind of embedded sensing technology within their devices. Yeah, things they haven't thought of, or other ways of kind of going about this. So it's been a really kind of fun project. And then I'm still a graphic designer. So, one of the things that I've been doing really recently, just last week, is this. So working with our photography students, which is really good fun for me, to show them what they can do, how they can take their images and do other things with them, how we can make these kind of mail outs to promote the students and promote the university. And it's one of those kind of projects that I do for fun, because it is fun. We get to experiment with different kind of print processes, for example. So yeah, that's what that is. Okay, so just checking the time. I think I'm doing okay. So now I'm going to talk a bit about past, present, and future. And I'm going to tell a personal story. I've already talked about this place. So this is where I'm from. This is where all of my family are from. This is where my family had been for generations and generations. My great-grandmother or my great-grandfathers, all of them were fishermen. My great-grandmother, the one that I'm referring to now or thinking about now, she also worked as part of the fishing industry. Her job was disgusting. She had to gut fish. So she had to gut fish. And she lived till she was 100. She was amazing. And she was tough. She makes me look like such a softie. I mean, she was so incredibly tough. And she used to tell me, she was quite mean as well as being quite tough. So I remember her telling me when I was just a little boy, she said about how she'd seen so much in her life. She had not actually seen, but she'd read about the first flight, the first manned flight in 1903. She was alive for that. So she'd kind of witnessed this, and then she'd watched Apollo 11, men landing on the moon in 1969. And she said, you know, you're never going to see anything like this, you know, because I guess it was such a technological leap. She couldn't imagine how anything could top this. But I think I can top it. And this is my story. When I was really young, maybe 4 years old, my granddad took me to this department store. And he took me to this department store to look at these, to look at calculators. Like, these were new and these were fantastic. And these, you know, he couldn't, but my granddad never went to the shops. And so for him to take me to a department store to look at calculators was kind of amazing. Yeah, he was in awe of these devices. He really wanted one. And years later, because they were really expensive then, years later, he bought one. And I just want to reflect on this for a second, how quickly things have progressed, maybe just for a second. You know, in 1948, I mean, there's quite a lot of debate about the first computer, but one of the first computers was Manchester Baby in 1948, part of the University of Manchester. By 2013, we had this thing called D-Wave, a quantum computer, a computer that's so complicated, we don't even know if it works or not really, even now. So yeah, this is how fast kind of processing power, I guess I'm talking about here, has progressed over this time. So in this slide, on the left-hand side, we've got this calculator from 1972. On the right-hand side, we've got the iPhone Pro 11 Pro from 2020. I think the iPhone 12 Pro 2021. So we've got, you know, pretty much 50 years separating these two devices. It's interesting, isn't it? In terms of the kind of form, these are roughly the same size. The iPhone can become a calculator, but of course it can become so many more things. You know, it's not just about processing power, it's about something else. And this is what our iPhones and our computers, but our iPhones, I think, or our smartphones particularly, have done for us. They've made us into kind of cyborgs. You know, we're no longer just human. We're kind of augmented humans. We're part machine, part kind of organic matter now. This guy, Halsey, in 1965, he didn't coin the term cyborg, but I think he helped to define it. He talked about there being this kind of new relationship between kind of inner space, what happens within our heads, and outer space, the things outside of our bodies. And he talked about a bridge between the two. And this is what iPhones have done for us. They've kind of established this bridge. I can't really remember very much at all anymore. I have to refer to my iPhone. You know, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. I have to refer to my iPhone. I don't remember any kind of telephone numbers. I used to be able to do that. I have to refer to my iPhone. You know, so there's these very simple things that iPhones have kind of replaced. But of course, more significantly, I think more significant than that, it's this kind of relationship that we have with the world. You know, I've got friends in China and the States and Singapore and South Korea. You know, I communicate with them face to face in a way that I am with you now. You know, it's a kind of portal to another world, something we couldn't have possibly imagined even when the iPhone came out. Anyway, so cyborgs, you know, not that long ago, we had this idea that cyborgs were going to be like the image on the left. And this is RoboCop. You know, we thought this was a cyborg, but actually the reality in 2021 is the guy on the right. He's a cyborg. You know, he looks a lot like me or you. He's got a smartphone like me or you. He's drinking coffee like me or you. We're all cyborgs. Okay, I'll come back to this in a second. I just want to talk about the present, because in Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner in 1982, and that was set in 2019, this is what the future looked like. And I think we can look at Blade Runner now and think, well, you know, that's not quite right. The future, you know, the present doesn't look like that. But actually, the present does look a bit like that in some places. So this is Beijing in 2021. Actually, that looks cooler than Blade Runner. Also, yeah, this little clip won't work, but you know, in Blade Runner, there's hover cars. We've got hover cars now. You know, we've got hover packs now. This is a video of a trial in the Peak District here in the UK of a guy with a hover pack trying to kind of locate someone who's injured on a hill to rescue them. So yeah, this technology exists now. You know, this isn't the future, this is the present. Also the present, near future, but present-ish. You know, Apple glasses. So at the moment, we're already these kind of augmented beings. You know, more than half of our world we access through our phones, through these kind of portals. You know, in the future, when this kind of information can be beamed into our retina, maybe through our glasses, you know, it's a continued step, I suppose, towards that kind of cyborgness. Also, something else I just wanted to kind of mention that feels like science fiction, but it's not. It's now. It's Neuralink, which is a Elon Musk company. And so what Neuralink have done is they've embedded chips inside a monkey or an ape's brain. And so the monkey can play Pong video games just by thinking. You know, this is current tech. This isn't future tech. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there for a second and maybe come back to some of these thoughts in a bit. So graphic design. And this is something that I've spoken about, or this statement is something that I've spoken with my students about at length over the last year. I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk about it. So the pioneers of our time are not taking the world at face value as a given from outside. Rather, they see the world as something you can pry open, something you can tinker with. I think this is really important, this idea that you don't take things at face value, and you do want to kind of delve deep and work out how things work. So a very quick example of this, you know, if we all use the same Photoshop filters, all of our images will look the same. You know, it's really important that we pry them open. We try different kind of approaches. We tinker. So present. So what I'm going to do here is just show you some examples of our graduates, because I think these graduates give you an idea of the kind of things that people go on to do, of course, but the kind of fields that they go on to work in, which might give you some kind of clues as to where graphic design is going. So Rory, he graduated just last year, but he's working for a company called 20 Something. And 20 Something I think are really interesting because they're not for me, they're for, you know, they're for the youth. The work that they produce is really kind of youthful. So here they're on this particular project, he was working on some of the material for FIFA 21, the console game. And these actually are animated GIFs, and they're very kind of rich in terms of the kind of graphic language, but very kind of contemporary. They're also, you know, they're assets. They're things that you might find across a range of different kind of media, which is interesting. You know, they're not one thing. You know, none of these are designed to be put on the side of a van or an aeroplane. They're designed to be kind of distributed and kind of redistributed online, most of them. Phil Stewart's another really interesting example. So when he graduated from us, the Farnham course, shortly after, he founded a company called PRELOADED. And what his company do is they make games. They make computer games, but they make computer games for education. So if you go onto the BBC website and look at the CVBs, which is the kind of children's BBC, there's an awful lot of kind of educational games there. Most of them are designed by Phil and his company. I don't think the next image is going to work very well, but the other thing that he's been doing recently is an awful lot more AR and VR work, a huge amount more. So two examples. This is from the Tate Modern. About 2.5 years ago now, there was a Modigliani exhibition there. And as part of the exhibition, there was a room where you could sit on a chair that was like Modigliani's chair that he sat on in his studio, put on some goggles, and you were taken to Modigliani's studio. So you could look around and you were behind his easel. It was a really, really interesting project. Yeah, this won't work. So I'm just going to explain. At the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, there's an exhibition. Oh,
pardon me for the interruption. We have 10 more minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, fine. Okay. So yeah, at the V&A, there's an exhibition about Alice in Wonderland at the moment. And so Phil has also done a VR kind of experience for that. Okay, I'm going to flick through quite quickly now because I want to use all of my 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk up here about materials. So some of our graduates using materials in odd and interesting and unconventional ways. Some of our graphic design graduates going on to work as illustrators. Actually, there are two examples in this presentation, really successful. So this is Margot, who's done a whole range of things from packaging for foodstuffs to toys to work at London Zoo. Yeah, Chris Cox. So he's the art director of a studio called Us Two Games. And one of the games they've made is Monument Valley, actually Monument Valley 1 and 2. So really, really successful. This has made millions of pounds for the studio. Malika, so another illustrator. So you may have seen her work before. It's really beautiful. So she graduated from the Farnham course. One of the things that I think is interesting about Malika is that she's now doing other things, products. And so working here in collaboration on some sneakers, here in collaboration on handbags. And so, you know, it's graphic design that goes beyond the kind of editorial that she was doing. A shower curtain. I don't like this, but it's kind of interesting. Then Richard. So Richard Lyons, he's another graphic designer from Farnham. He worked for a couple of interesting design studios in London before going to San Francisco and working for a company called Design Studio, where he was part of the team responsible for the rebranding of Airbnb. He was then headhunted by Apple. So now he's part of the human interface guideline team at Apple. And he can't tell us what he's doing other than that, which is brilliant and secretive and Apple-ish. So yeah, these are some of the things that we do know that he's been working on. And then design reference, just very quickly, because I know I've only got a few minutes. I just want to talk a bit about hardware. Hardware is the kind of thing that I'm interested in. You know, the machines that I made, it's more to do with hardware rather than software. I can look at this and I can understand how it works. Software, I find quite difficult. A lot of my students don't find it difficult in the same way, but there is this kind of division. But it's when you put hardware and software together, you end up with something really interesting. And so this is a friend of mine, a guy called Dominic Wilcox, who worked in collaboration with some custom shoemakers in Nottingham in the UK. And he made these shoes that are GPS shoes. So you put them on, if you click your heels 3 times, the GPS comes to life. And then using the LEDs in the toes of the shoes, it shows you how to get home. And there's a little video there. Interesting. So hardware, software, because I feel like there's other things I just quickly want to mention, really important. This guy's a biohacker. He's working with biological material. You know, what does that mean at the moment? This doesn't affect us at all, I think, in terms of graphic design, but will it in the future? You know, this is an avenue that maybe we want to explore. Algorithms. This is a little Holly Hurd and Jill featuring Spawn. Is a piece of music that's made by some kind of algorithm, made by kind of machine learning, artificial intelligence. And it's been, I've seen it kind of discussed quite a lot online recently because it's been presented as something that's quite new. But of course, there's been these kind of algorithms that create music for a long time. So here from 1957. But I think something else for us to kind of watch out for, the idea that kind of algorithms might generate things. And then finally, I think for this bit, this is, again, and this is a bit like the kind of biohackers work. This is an artist called Heather Dewey Hagborg. And what she does is she takes these discarded objects and she extracts DNA from them. And then using the DNA, she creates portraits of the people that she thinks left them, spat them out, deposited them. So really interesting, I think. I think my tips for the future, and maybe we'll end it here. My tips for the future. I think it's really, really important that what we do is authentic. And I would encourage you to look at the Sony bouncing balls ad. for an example of this kind of authenticity. Something that's real and tangible, and it feels real and tangible. Also, the things that we make have to be meaningful. They have to affect people. They have to help people, improve things. They have to be important, meaningful. And an example of this, again, unfortunately this won't work, is this little video called Thursday's Children. And I'm going to explain very briefly what happens in this. This is a film from 1954. It's ancient. But in the film, there's a teacher teaching children who are deaf to speak. And she's teaching deaf children to speak using really basic tools. So in one shot, she's got a balloon, and she's holding the balloon, and she's speaking onto the balloon, and you can feel the vibrations through your palms. And so she gets the child to put their palms onto the balloon so they can feel the vibrations of her speech. And then the child has to try and make the same vibrations. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so I think it's a really useful kind of example of how things can be meaningful, how things can have a kind of significant meaning. We don't want anything else that's throwaway, do we? We want things to be, genuine and useful and meaningful. Okay. So am I almost out of time? Yeah.
3 more minutes. You can go.
3 more minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay then. So in 3 more minutes, some specifics. I was just going to talk about the kind of approaches that we take. So one of the approaches that we take is kind of hypothetical projects, things that aren't real but could be real. So an example of that is, Archigram did the same thing back in the 1970s, an architecture studio. They said, well, what if a city could walk? What if it could, get up and it could walk to another location, to enjoy better weather or whatever it might be. We ask the same kind of naive, kind of hypothetical questions often. So that's one thing. We also are, really influenced by things like this. First Things First manifesto from 2000. This was a kind of updated version of the First Things First manifesto from the 1960s. Then the other thing, final thing then, speculative design. The idea that things don't have to be done in a way that they've always been done, I suppose. And so a couple of examples of this. Design at the moment is generally affirmative. If someone tells you, I want you to design whatever, you say, yes, okay, I'll design that. But we don't have to do that. We can be kind of critical. We could say, well, why do you want to do that? Do we need more toothpaste tubes or whatever it might be? Equally, design tends to be framed as something that solves problems. Does it have to be? Can we find problems and then try and answer them? Can we, rather than finding answers, can we discover new experiences, new ways of doing things? And I think this is a really kind of key one. Design at the moment tends to make us want to buy stuff. But can we instead make people think? So, rather than to do with kind of obtaining stuff in exchange for payment, maybe we can use our mind to kind of connect ideas together. Okay, and then I'm going to flick through these real quick, because the final thing here is just showing examples of the kind of things that the staff do. We have really, really interesting people who make really interesting work. Their work is really significant, and for me, that's the thing that keeps me here. I guess, I don't need to still be working 2 days a week as a graphic design lecturer, but I don't do it because I need to do it. I do it because I'm surrounded by really interesting people who would kind of inspire me. So maybe that's the end.
That I'm a little at a loss of words, but I have noted down quite a few. Because your story, as design faculty members, we always lead into a design project with keywords. So here's a collection of keywords, which I think could sum up you as a person and as a teacher. Honest, candid, humble, unconventional, interesting, There is a giddy enthusiasm, a childlike enthusiasm about your own work. You are in the moment, you're curious, experimental, fun, authentic, tangible, meaningful. Thank you very much for making the time. I really wish we had more time for you to run through your entire presentation. And I really hope we someday have you over on campus and then we can actually have a full day with you. So
That'd
that
be
would
brilliant.
be great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.